RTÉ Rugby Podcast, and delighted to be joined by Donal, Lenihan, Bernard, Jackman and Wes Liddy to discuss all things rugby. And we've had quite a bit of news that since we last talked. We'll get into the Lions selection maybe and just your thoughts. I know it's been done to death now, but I'd be curious as to your overall thoughts on the squad in a couple of minutes' time. But some good news first, Donal. Advocates of free-to-air rugby will be pretty happy with the news that Virgin TV and RTÉ have come together under an umbrella of allowing rugby to remain free-to-air to showcase the Six Nations for the next few years. And it has to be good news. I know we're slightly biased here because it means we all have a job and we're going to be able to pay the mortgage the next one. But generally speaking, it's good news for rugby, is it not?
Yeah, slightly biased. Are you joking me? We're thrilled. Couldn't believe. Delighted to hear the news when it came in. Obviously, I was lucky to be part of RTÉ's coverage for the Six Nations for a long number of years. And it was a huge blow when we lost it, 4 or 5 years ago. But look, there's a wider picture on the line here. We all, I suppose, were worried when CVC came in. They took their share of the Six Nations. As we know, they're involved in Pro 14, the Gallagher Premiership. There's a wider story at play here. But you have to dot your hat to the Six Nations Committee. And to be fair to Philip Brown, even when we were speculating going back 12 months ago that it was inevitable that the Six Nations would go behind the paywall, he was always of a view that, well, look, no, that doesn't necessarily mean that. So, look, I think it's brilliant news. There was a model, obviously, in the UK in the last 4 years with the fact that the BBC and ITV had come together to keep it on terrestrial television. I think it's exciting and it's brilliant for the general public out there that, the likes of Virgin and RTÉ are coming together to keep the product available to the viewers. And, I just wonder, I think from a timing perspective, we saw a couple of weeks ago, the new Super Rugby in Australia. Rugby in Australia was it's hemorrhaging money big time. General public had lost interest. When they set up their own new competition over the last 9 months, it was put on terrestrial television for the first time in years. And the audiences went through the roof. There's an interest in the provincial rugby in Australia that they haven't seen for years. Television audience have multiplied since Fox, who had been involved as the pay-per-view since the advent of professional rugby back in 1995, they stepped out of the picture. And the response has been phenomenal. The ARU have been blown away by their viewership figures. So I would imagine in terms of timing, and obviously, look, the negotiations were well down the track in terms of keeping the Six Nations on terrestrial television. But in terms of timing, that response and news from Australia, I think couldn't have come at a better time. So look, I think it's brilliant for the fans. The fact now that, the games will be available for the minimum of 4 years, I would imagine. But, the model is there now. It's worked well. Average viewerships, I think, in the UK for games on BBC were up to 9 and 10 million. So why would you put in a system which might reduce that to 500,000 or 600,000? So look, it's great news overall.
It's great news, Birch. And, for Donal as well, when the news came in, I never thought a man with, obviously the work he's had done to recover after all the damage playing rugby. And at his age, he was able to do 3 cartwheels around the kitchen when the news came in. That's just the excitement. But look, in terms of just the growth of the game, Donal mentioned the Australian example there this season, which really has exploded, even beyond, I think, what they were expecting in terms of participation numbers now are up across the board. Attendances at matches are up across the board and viewing figures as well. It seems to be the way to go, even despite a CVC deal like has happened as well, that free-to-air is eyes on the game, which is what you need.
Yeah, it's brilliant for the fact that the 20s and women's are all going to get shown as well. And if we had went behind the paywall to the likes of Amazon, I would have feared how we could grow the game here. It's such a massive opportunity for non-rugby households to get involved and follow it. And the Australian example, 42,000 people at the final last week, a phenomenal game. It was one of the 5th minute of injury time. And it was also on free to air, and the figures they got for that were through the roof compared to what we're watching a year ago behind the paywall. So hopefully we can definitely mirror that success in Australia. Yeah, we can help continue to grow the game here.
Yeah, and Wes, just from an RTÉ standpoint as well, to have Six Nations will be back as an organisation, it's something to get their teeth stuck into, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's obviously brilliant for the wider public that it's going to be on free to air, wherever that may be. And it's, in terms of the game, growth of the game, it's huge. I suppose just with the Australian thing, for a slight note of caution, is that it's Channel 9 that we're showing it, and Tim Horan gave a line in commentary at the end of the final the other day saying rugby is back. And that was a combination of a 42,000 attendance and 463,000 viewers in a country of 20 million. So, we'd expect to get more than 463,000 for a Munster-Leinster game in the Pro 14 on free to air. Certainly any Six Nations game would be above it, and several of them would be double it in a country of 5 million people. So, I think the Australian example isn't one we'd be looking to mimic exactly. We'd be looking to far exceed that, really.
Yeah, are you any chance you're going to ditch your kind of obsession with that Protestant sport hurling at the moment and just come back to rugby, or how do you see the next
highly unlikely, I would say, Hugh, to be honest.
Okay. Listen, we move on, lads. The Lions announcement just fell 24 hours after we finished up last week's podcast. So, Donal, I just wanted to get your thoughts overall. There has been a bit of reaction from an Irish standpoint with the absence of Johnny Sexton. I suppose mainly Gary Ringrose has been mentioned, as is James Ryan. I don't know if that's the Irish rose-tinted glass again, kind of looking inwards and feeling a bit hard done by here. But can you understand the reasons why Gatland has chosen to leave out those players, and overall your thoughts on the squad?
Yeah, look, I think there's a certain logic to the way they've got about picking the squad. As with everybody else, I think when it comes, my own particular squad, I think I differed in 6 players, and certainly 4 of those 6, I would argue vehemently that they should have been included. When you look at the overall announcement, you sit down, it's something that's been live on television now for over 20 years. It was streamed on the Lions website, and I have to say I sat down with full of enthusiasm. I had picked Alan Wynne-Jones as captain myself, but my God, he nearly put me to sleep before the announcement of the squad.
How happy is he to be Lions question? How many times?
He made Raj look ecstatic in a half of his interviews, which was a fair achievement. But no, I looked the hologram, I thought, was the highlight of that. But obviously then they went to announce the names and did it in alphabetical order. So like Bundy Aki was second out, and geez, all of a sudden that was one that certainly I hadn't figured. When you look at it, and I've said this in the last week, I've written about it this morning. The Lions there's a massive amount of luck in terms of being in the right place at the right time in terms of Lions selection. I think Jack Conan is an example of that, a guy who took his opportunity against England and against Exeter Chiefs to take his chances. You look at James Ryan on the flip side of that. I would certainly have brought James Ryan. There's no doubt in my mind that he's working his way back to fitness, having been out of the game for a while. Is James Ryan a better player than Johnny Hill from Exeter? Absolutely. I thought against Leinster, Johnny Hill, he nearly got himself sent off twice with 2 very borderline tackles. But it was, I think, Ryan's misfortune that they came up against a huge La Rochelle front 5 at a time when he wasn't back to maybe 100% fitness. Any of the last 3 years, he made his debut in 18, Grand Slam winning year, outstanding season for him. He'd have been picked in 18, 19 and 20. 21, he gets that concussion at the wrong time, loses out. But on the wider scale, I'd certainly have picked Kyle Sinckler. I wouldn't be convinced about either Sutherland or Xander Fagerson going to South Africa. But look, they'll have to prove themselves. Overall, I think, look, it's a squad.
On James Ryan, before you go on, just quickly, has he played too much rugby, Don? Do you think? Has he been a victim? He's this wonder kid who's burst onto the blocks 3 or 4 years ago. He said he's played brilliant rugby. He's played an awful lot of rugby for such a young guy still. Do you think that's an issue or no?
No, I don't. You compare it to what his counterparts in England would have played or in France. I don't think he's played more rugby than them. And, generally, we've always eulogized the system and the minutes of management and game management within the RFU. So no, I don't buy that. He's 24 years of age, for God's sake. Do you know what I mean? Okay. He hasn't played more rugby than Maro Itoje or, Alan Wynne-Jones is probably the only second row who can be out of rugby for 2 or 3 months and come back and play as well as he did in the Six Nations. So no, I don't buy that. But overall, I think the Kyle Sinckler one is a strange one for me as well. And overall, I would just be slightly concerned. They're obviously besotted with the whole physicality thing of South Africa. Have they sacrificed a little bit too much creativity in terms of their attacking play and their midfield combinations with a view to almost stopping South Africa as opposed to being more creative? When you look at the quality they have in their back three, you know, the Anthony Watsons, the Reece Zamets, Liam Williams, there's brilliant attacking talent there. But you just like, I would have thought a Gary Ringrose or a Henry Slade would have added to that mix in midfield. So I'd have a slight concern there, but I think, you know, Gatland, he's still, that first test in South Africa in 2009 when he was the Lions forward coach, and just the massive physicality they brought that day. Second test probably in Durban, the most physical international I've seen in the professional era. So that's the overriding theme. But look, that's the way they're approaching it. Time will tell whether they got it right or wrong.
One of the criticisms, Birch, is that Gregor Townsend has had a little bit too much influence on it from a Scottish point of view. Again, this is mostly coming from Irish rugby fans, so you have to take it with a pinch of salt. But overall, your thoughts on the squad?
Yeah, look, I agree with everything's been said. That there was some surprises. I don't think we can blame Gregor Townsend. The Scots have improved. You know, they were, I think, level with us on points difference in the Six Nations, or they certainly had a decent Six Nations. So, you know, they have some individual players who, you know, have stood up. I personally wouldn't have taken Ali Price. I don't think he's, you know, a good enough 9. But you know, as a coaching group, Gatland is strong enough for sure to be able to make his own decisions on that. So I wouldn't blame it on Gregor Townsend. I just think that we have to understand that we're not at the peak of our powers at the moment as a country. And even domestically, you know, we're not at the top table in Europe, bar Leinster getting to a semi-final. So it's natural that we don't have as many as we maybe would have liked to have. So yeah, I think we you know, in terms of numbers, it's probably a fair reflection of where we're at.
Jonathan Sexton hasn't really been mentioned yet, Wes. I know, you know, there are plenty of former internationals that scratch their heads saying that on form, Johnny Sexton is still the best out half in Europe, and it's puzzling why he hasn't gone. Can you see why Gatland has left him out?
Well, first I'd say on Gregor Townsend, he definitely did have an influence. He is the coach, so, you know, obviously. So I don't know where anyone's. I don't get the kind of umbrage people are taking to that. Like, I mean, he's entitled to pick the team whatever way he thinks is going to get a result, or pick it in conjunction with Warren, obviously. But as far as Johnny goes, yeah, his form probably was better, I would say, than all three when he was at his best. But, you know, he did miss a lot of time, and his form did fluctuate a little bit. So I don't think it's highly surprising that he's not there, really. Like, that's not to say I don't think he should be there, but I'm not surprised necessarily he wasn't picked. But I think there's a few Irish ones that are probably, like, I'm sure for James Ryan, the idea that there's 2 Irish second rows on the tour and he's not one of them is, you know, scarcely believable, as Donal said up until a few months back. But equally, there's a couple of Irish ones that were perhaps fortunate to be there. Like, I mean, obviously Bundyaki, no one saw coming. You know, Andrew Porter's done well to get in there as a second choice tight head. That's not to say he's not good enough to be in the squad, but it's harder when you're coming off the bench regularly. So yeah, I mean, you take the rough with the smooth from the Irish point of view, but I think overall, I probably don't think there's as much quality there as there was in the last couple of squads, to be honest.
Is there enough quality, Donal, just before we leave it then, for this Lions squad to go and beat South Africa? And equally, you know, I guess just a sidetrack of that, Gatland, as you know, has always done things his own way, and he's always taken, Donal, a certain amount of pleasure by saying, I know better than the sum of your parts, and I'm doing things my own way. And when he's proven right, as has often been the case, you know, he's been absolutely proven correct in what he's done.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. I mean, he's always been his own man, and I respect that fully. And, you know, there is a logic to the way that they've gone about. This isn't a sort of a willy-nilly selection. There is a process there. There are certain key elements that they want to see in players, and they've picked the squad with that in mind. As I say, the test series will dictate whether it was the right or the wrong approach. I agree with Wes from the point of view, when you dissected the 37 names, and as of now, you picked the team that would play in the opening test. It isn't the most powerful or the most stunningly brilliant Lions team of the last, say, 3 or 4 tours. There's no doubt about that. But I think this whole tour is predicated by the fact every time the Lions go on tour, and I've spoken about this on this podcast numerous times, you go with one hand tied behind your back. It's a race against time. You're cramming. You're like a student in the night before the leaving, just cramming. What am I going to do? That's the way the coaches have to approach it. But this time, for the first time, certainly in the professional era, the opposition are probably less prepared than the Lions. From the simple point of view, right now, Rassie Erasmus doesn't know at what stage he's going to get a lot of his overseas players back to South Africa. It depends on their domestic involvement in domestic games in Japan, in Ireland, in England, and in France. So his squad are scattered to the 4 winds. They haven't been together since the World Cup. Secondly, he was hoping that the guys based in South Africa would have been involved in the Rainbow Cup and they would have played against opposition outside of their own country. So we have a scenario where not one of the Springbok squad have played in an international test since the 2nd of November 2019. So they're in as much of a scramble for that opening test as the Lions are. They were to have, I think, warm-up tests against Italy and the USA. They've been scrapped. Now they're hoping to get 2 tests against Georgia. So the whole thing is a race against time. Now, there is one element with South Africa. We watched that brilliant documentary on the World Cup, and they're coming together. I think there'll be an emotional energy within the Springboks, given what they achieved at the World Cup, given the impact it had back in South Africa. The fact that they haven't come together since then, I think that emotional energy and that will to do well against the Lions could well supersede the best coaching and the best sort of tactical approach. But that's the unknown factor in this Lions tour. And that's why, for me, it makes it one of the most intriguing test series that we've seen for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And you're like, there's no question now it is going to go ahead, John, right? I mean, it's definitely happening.
Well, I'd be amazed now with the squads picked. And, I mean, I just saw they came out, I think it was announced this morning, there's a 25% reduction in the salaries that the players and management are getting from 4 years ago, taking into account, obviously, the fallout with COVID. So, I mean, if we're getting to that stage, I'd be surprised now if it doesn't go ahead.
Okay, one player who's going on the Lions tour, who's almost a nailed-on certainty, I think, to start at tight head barring injury, is Tadhg Furlong Birch. He has just signed a 1-year contract extension with the RTÉ Review, which maybe raised a couple of eyebrows in its the short duration of the contract to begin with. He today says he has himself opted for that 1-year contract, obviously because he feels maybe that if he gets more rugby under his belt and has less injuries over the next year or so, he'll be in a better position to get a better deal from the RTÉ Review. So do you think it's the right move for all parties concerned, or what's the reading of it?
I think from an RFU point of view, obviously, ideally, they would have tied him down for 3 or 4 years. You don't want to have your prized asset as being a potential risk. And Tadhg Furlong is a player that could go into any of the top clubs in Europe and would be targeted. He would be an ideal marquee player for a Premiership club, which means he doesn't come under the salary cap, which if you can be of that quality where you're one of the 2 marquee players that you are willing to allocate, your market value has no relevance to the average player, because you don't come under salary cap, and any extra funds they have, they'll pump it into that. So we know that market is quiet at the moment in the UK. The French clubs are still reeling financially. I mean, there's a lot of them are going to have to readjust their budgets a little bit. So for a player of his quality going to the market, it definitely wasn't the right time. And obviously, you'd imagine he feels that the contract he was being offered by the RFU wasn't large enough to tie himself down long term. So I think from our point of view, at least we keep him in Ireland. So that's the positive. And I suppose from Tadhg Furlong's point of view, he'll see how the economic climate is in Irish rugby in a year's time, but also he more than likely the budgets of the top English and French clubs will be higher, and he will have more bargaining power. So it's not ideal, but at least we've kept him. We haven't lost him, and I would like to hope that in a year's time, Irish rugby will be in a better place, and we can tie him down for till the next World Cup at least, and go from there.
Is it a bit short-sighted, Wes, for the RFU? I mean, I'm struggling to wonder what Tadhg Furlong has to prove. I mean, he's obviously proven himself as literally one of the best tight heads in the world over the last few years. Is it a bit short-sighted, a bit of a risk for the RFU not to take the plunge now and offer him what it is that he wants to tie him into a long-term contract, rather than risk losing him potentially? And look, I know more often than not, these risks don't come to reality and players sign up, but it is still a risk nonetheless not to tie him into a long-term contract now when they can secure his services for the next 4 years and just pay him what he wants.
Probably is, yeah. One way of looking at it. I think obviously they know the players involved, and from what you hear about Tadhg, he wouldn't be a guy that would be highly likely to embrace a move abroad necessarily. He's happy enough where he is, so maybe they were hedging their bets that way. I don't know. It's very interesting in terms of, like, obviously there was casualties, so to speak, contract-wise across the provinces in the last few months, but they were generally players at the kind of mid to lower end of the spectrum. And it seems like the marquee deals are the effect of COVID has nearly been in shortening the length of the deal as opposed to a drastic salary reduction. There's been some salary reduction, but they've probably done quite well to keep pace there. And you'd imagine with the influx of money that will come from CVC and different things, that ultimately in the long term, COVID won't affect salaries that much at the top end. The only caveat with that, I suppose, is that the wealth of CVC is almost irrelevant in one sense, because everyone else is benefiting from that money too. So our actual wealth in comparison to other countries hasn't risen at all. So I think it's just like, I just think it's on that term, and in terms of, the stuff that's happened with the TV stuff, things that have happened over the last few years, like Sevens being in the Olympics, talks of changing calendars. I just think there's a very interesting kind of period ahead coming where the entire landscape could change quite a bit. You don't want to be too dramatic about it, but I think things could change quite a bit on all sorts of levels over the next number of years.
What's your reading of it, Donal?
Just you.
Sorry, Marcia.
Yeah, look, I think there's an element. It's almost, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a policy decision made within the RFU at a time when, as Wes said, they had to reduce the contracted numbers in the provinces. We know from an administrative point of view, there was a number of people lost their jobs. So from that point of view, as an organisation, I think it was probably difficult to look at maybe increasing somebody's salary by 10, 20%. And as a consequence of that, there's no doubt that, the negotiators on this, they were at loggerheads to try and find a solution. There's no question in terms of quality. Tadhg Furlong is probably now the leading Irish player. He knows his value will probably go up another 10 or 15% like he is. He should, and he will start at tight head in the 3 tests. Hopefully injury doesn't interfere. So he'd probably come back from South Africa worth even more. So in that respect, it probably keeps his options open in terms of, we know what tight head props, I mean, they're up there with number 10s now in terms of the value to the team. And look, he'd have so many suitors in France and England in particular. But it's not a great position given that he will now be, well, maybe he decided he's now going to be negotiating a year out from the next World Cup. So that will give him an opportunity to make up for what he's lost in this 1 year contract, on the basis that certainly from a cash flow point of view, crowds will be back in the Aviva Stadium. The money will start coming through from CVC. There's new broadcast deals in Pro 16 and in the Six Nations. So as a consequence of that, the union will be in a better position. So I think, look, there'll be tough negotiation again in 12 months' time. But look, it's brilliant that he's staying here. But, you know, we spoke last week about, or 2 weeks ago, about, you know, the Irish model and the necessity to tweak the model on the back of what's happening to the provinces in Europe. It'd be interesting to see if Tadhg Furlong did go to England or France, whether or not you'd see a tweak in the, you know, players outside of Ireland not being available to the national team. I think you'd be seeing an exception for that one.
Absolutely. Birch, do you want to come in there?
No, I just wanted to come in and say that actually, in this situation, I agree with Donal. I think the IRFU had to be prudent, and there would have been massive question marks raised if they blew their policy around, you know, wage control, etc. during COVID to keep Tadhg Furlong, given what's happening, you know, across the rest of the player base and administrative redundancies, etc. So I think they have to give them credit. You know, they didn't let him leave. They managed to tie him down for a year, and hopefully in 6-7 months they're in a better position in terms of, you know, where they're going in terms of budgets to be able to do a deal with him. So I don't see it as being a big worry. I think Tadhg obviously wants to stay. If he didn't want to stay, he would have gone now, you know. So I'll be back for.
Yeah, that's my sense of it as well, that the IRFU said, look, you know, we can't afford to give you what you want, but let's sign a 1-year contract, and when things change, and obviously we get crowds back, that was my sense of the whole thing as well. So look, if that's the case, then great, and we'll see what happens in a year's time. The Rainbow Cup was obviously ongoing. You know, there's very little interest in it other than that the Irish provinces are playing each other. So from that point of view, it's kind of interesting maybe to have a look at a couple of guys. What's very apparent, I guess, is that Munster are going bullheaded for a trophy here, and they have picked their strongest side now for the last couple of weeks in a row. It's very apparent that Johan van Graan wants a piece of silverware to show for their season's efforts here. You would hope from the effort that the players are putting in, and obviously from the importance that he has given this competition, that they will go and do that. It seems quite important to Munster this season.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it, actually, to be honest. It's better than having no games, I think.
Oh, absolutely,
yeah, I suppose they are definitely going for it. I don't think they're playing their strongest side every week. I think, you know, that team that put out against Ulster was quite far off full strength. In fact, there was a couple of selections in it. You know, I can understand, even though I wouldn't necessarily agree with the idea of trying to win the trophy and putting out a strong team, I can equally understand with going with younger guys with a view to next year. They arguably fell somewhere in between the other night when there was a couple of guys picked that won't even be at the club next year. And I'm not sure what benefit that is in the long term. So, you know, I think it's a mix and match policy, really. And I think it's going to continue that way from what I hear. But look, I don't think it's a medal fellas are going to cherish at the end of their career the way they would some other medals if they win it. But can there be long-term gains out of it? Absolutely, in terms of style and personnel development, I think.
Yeah, and Rowan van Graan came out after the match, Donal, and has said, we're not signing any more players now. We've kind of signed the guys that we want to. We're hoping, obviously, they've got Rowan, Simon Zebo's coming back, Jason Jenkins, Rowan Osborne as well. And they've got 9 guys coming through from the academy. So
all the South African contracts are done, you see, Hugh.
Yeah. Doesn't seem to be the case. Obviously, the addition of Simon as well, if his recovery from injury is managed, the caveat being, of course, if South Africa decide to take him down for the Lions tour and they throw him in, you know, when he's not quite ready, out of what happened to Joey Carberry back in the World Cup, then they could have a serious problem. But let's hope that that's managed sufficiently. But yeah, like your reading of the Rainbow Cup, Donal, so far, Munster, the trophy.
Well, look, I agree with Wes from the point of view that the games have been way more interesting than I thought they would be. But I think that's the nature of the local derbies. You go back to the Ulster Connacht game, it was a fantastic game, the one that Connacht won in the last second. Munster actually played very well the other night. Ulster disappointed me. We spoke about how easily they kind of capitulated against Leicester the previous week. You would have thought there'd be some kind of a reaction or a response to that, but there wasn't. And, you know, they had a decent team out as well. I watched Connacht and Leinster, and after 10 or 15 minutes, you wondered, geez, the Leinster really have, you know, the hangover from La Rochelle is there, and then they just flipped the switch, played brilliant rugby. And I think kind of highlighted the issues that Connacht have in their front five in particular, and the loss of Quinn Roux, who's now gone off to Montpellier. And that's obviously another contractual issue that we did mention. So from that point of view, I have found it great. And I must say, this weekend, we have another couple of derbies coming up. But I just question, you know, I saw the announcement of the fixtures for rounds 4 to 6. I don't think, we'll be quite as animated when Munster play Cardiff or, when Connacht are playing Benetton. I mean, those games for me, we've seen so many drab matches in around the Pro 14 involving those teams. I just find it very strange now that we have rounds 4 to 6, but everybody has a bye. So therefore you only have 2 of the 3 games. I don't understand the logic of how they actually came up with the fixtures, or do you know what I mean? How they balanced who plays what in terms of when you only have 3 fixtures or 2 fixtures left. We don't know what's going to happen in terms, is there a final? Is there a playoff? Is it the top of the league? What is it? So
there's a suggestion they're going to try play a North v South final now. I heard yesterday. The winner of the Southern Conference and the winner of the Northern Conference, South African versus European, maybe in Italy or somewhere like that, which would be great, but isn't guaranteed.
But even that.
Yeah.
Like,
So
sorry, Birch, go on. Yeah.
No. The original idea, Donal, was to when it turned out the South Africans couldn't travel, which obviously wasn't a surprise to most of us. But then they said they were going to run off a Northern Rainbow Cup, and the top 2 teams would play a final. So the top 2 teams in the north and the top 2 teams in South Africa would play a final. Over the last week, they've seemed to believe that they can get 1 team from South Africa up to Europe at the end of these 5 or 6 rounds. So that would mean that the top team from North plays the top team from South Africa. And they're talking about Italy as the venue for the final for some reason. But it's not guaranteed by any manner of means. But all these clubs, all these teams are pretty much in the dark around what the end is look like. Having said that, I think Munster, having beaten Leinster first up, like it's conceivable that Leinster, if Munster are unbeaten Leinster, they could lock Leinster out and obviously go straight to a final against the South Africans, or potentially have to play Leinster in a final. But also likewise, I mean, Glasgow have had a good start, and they're put with, I think, the Italian teams. Glasgow could end up, becoming a top team as well, and knock Munster and Leinster out. So it's a mess. It's an absolute mess. Yeah. They have no clarity on it. Just on the Wesley thing about why Munster picked those players that they picked, I think, Johan and the coaches there are thinking around, we started the season together, we finished the season together. So that's probably the JJ and Nick McCarthy being involved is with a view to keeping squad morale all the way through to the end of competition. So I can see the reason for that, even though obviously you would say you're better off giving some of the younger players game time in their place. But if they want to win it together and let those guys have a proper shot at being competitive all the way to the end of the season.
So what you're saying really is, having got Leinster out of the way and Munster chasing that trophy for 10 years, they're now going to pull the Blue Bulls up from South Africa. So they'll have to turn around and try and beat them then in Zebra or someplace.
Exactly.
Great.
Yeah, so off we go to Parma, Mannix, again. Another trip to Parma.
How bad?
Yeah.
Happy memories.
Any truth in the rumour that you taught Scotty Robinson everything he knows about breakdancing after winning the league contest? Apparently you started that trend in Grenoble. Is there any truth in
that? No, my predecessor, my director Ruby Fabrice Landreau has a dance he does every game, the Benny B. But only very late at night with a lot of liquor do I ever verge near a dance floor, and that's not a sight to see. But look, he has the moves for sure.
He sure does. Okay, just before we leave it, lads, Mike Brown, this is hot off the press, has just been given a 6-week ban for his stamp on during the Harlequins game at the weekend. It was pretty apparent for all to see. The 6-week ban, of course, means now that his career is effectively over, Birch, because he's retiring at the end of the season. It's not a great way for, I suppose, an England international of his stature to end his career, but it was fairly blatant. And whether or not he meant it is really a moot point. If you stand on someone's face, you're looking at that kind of ban, right?
Yeah, it was a nasty incident, to be honest, and it is sad for him that his career with Harlequins is going to end with a suspension. In fairness to Quins, since the change of coach, they have turned it around. There was an unbelievable game at the weekend to come back against Wasps and win it to death. Marcus Smith's been phenomenal. If he was to go get into Eddie Jones' plans, he could change completely the way England play. He's that good. But for Mike Brown, he's off to Newcastle. It's a sad way to end. But look, if you take a chance with foul play like that, you're taking a risk, and he's going to have to eat it up now and suffer.
Yeah, and I just was going through as well. It's something that we might get into another time, Wes, but the amount of cards that have been still dished out in the game. I think over the weekend in the Premiership alone, there was 10 yellow cards and 2 red cards handed out. Obviously, Will Addison got sent off in the Munster game. Peter Manny got a yellow card. It's not the officials here that are at fault. They're just implementing the rules and the regulations or the laws, if you want to be really pedantic about it, as they're being told. But the players still aren't adapting to what the instruction is, and it's kind of just delaying the game, and it's unnecessary. And there's an awful lot of yellow cards and red cards being handed out still.
So why wouldn't they be giving out a lot of cards when you can come back on after 20 minutes? You know.
Yeah.
As far as Mike Brown goes, yeah, I go along with Birch. Terribly sad. He always seems such a likable character. 6 weeks, like you go back to a bygone era. Peter Clasey got about 40 weeks for kicking Ruma in a far less dangerous incident. So I think he's blessed to get off with 6 weeks.
Yeah,
I was wondering when the cookies would come into the conversation this week.
Yeah. Well, in fairness, Conor O'Shea has always said that Mike Brown.
I was waiting until you got the first Cork Con reference in to bring it up.
In fairness, Donal, Conor O'Shea has always said that Mike Brown is grossly misunderstood, and he's had a very difficult upbringing, and I think his father wasn't the nicest guy that ever walked. So, to kind of give him an easier path, but nonetheless, look, I mean, it was what it was the weekend.
Yeah, look, it's an unfortunate way for him. I think 17 years in Harlequins. But look, these things happen. You know, I don't know the fella at all. I never met him. You know, so I mean, I wouldn't cast any aspersions on him. But look, it's look, I have to say the Will Addison one. I didn't watch. Geez, I know he hadn't started a game for over a year, but he was like a man possessed in that opening trade, like a fella let loose. And you know, to be fair, he was unlucky to miss out on the World Cup squad 2 years ago. If you remember, he played in a couple of the warm-up games. He's been out injured almost since then. He came on as a sub, I think, against Connacht and nearly turned. You know, I thought he made a brilliant impact in the game. He's a player we've almost forgotten about, but I don't know. But himself and Rory Scandal, and Rory is a very sort of quiet lad. Something must have happened in an Irish squad training game somewhere along the line, but they weren't holding back. But it did seem strange. I'd almost forgotten watching the match that he could be replaced after 20 minutes. But you know, that's one of the more bizarre changes that we've seen.
It is, and I don't know if that one is there to stay. Okay, lads, thanks a million for your thoughts. As always, we're back next week. Enjoy the Rainbow Cup matches this weekend. Ulster Leinster and Munster Connacht, both taking place on Friday night. They're live on RTÉ Radio 1 Extra. Okay, thanks, gents. Talk to you next week.